Let me share with you Proverbs 18 said, "Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." Naaman had some pride. He had some issues with pride. He wanted to be the number one man. And he's getting ready to leave. And the Bible says that his servant, one of his servants, walked up to Naaman and he said, "You know what?" He said, "I know I'm nothing. I'm a servant of yours. I know that what I say won't make a difference to a lot of people. But let me ask you one question." He said, "Naaman, if the messenger of God had asked you to do some great thing, something great, would you have done it?" Now you have to remember, Naaman's already mad. The guts that it took for his servant to come out and talk to a great and mighty man like that. He said, "If he had just asked you to do something great, would you have done that?" And Naaman said, "Well, of course." I think that part of Naaman's his thought process was, that he would have to do something great because he was asking for something great. And the servant said, "But you know what? He didn't ask you to do something great." See, there's the problem. We as Christian people, so many times when we get into church and we get into activities, we think that if we're not the head honcho, if we're not the top dog, if we're not the one leading music, or we're not the one teaching a class, that we're not being used by God. Now see, Jim didn't ask me to say this, and since he's not here, he's not going to be able to defend this, but I'm going to tell you something. Do you know that one of the greatest things that a pastor in a church could use is people to just be there to help him? How many times would it be a blessing for somebody's call in life to be just to come and clean the church? I told you that Jim and I grew up together in a church. That church actually is in the school district. I'm a maintenance and transportation supervisor for a school district in the middle of downtown Phoenix. The church that we went to is in my school district. And as people say, it's in the hood. I had the privilege of just about a year and a half ago, I was driving by there and doing some work, and I was driving by that church, and the pastor happened to be there. And I stopped just to talk to him for a few minutes, and he asked me if I wanted to look around the church, and I hadn't been there in 26 years. And so as I walked in there, I was able to see the place where I got saved. As I stood at the front of the church and behind the pulpit, I remember where I preached my first message. I could remember that in the back of the church, toward the right as you were looking out, my granddad was a deacon in that church, and that's where he would sit every Sunday. Brought back some great memories. But you know what my grandfather's ministry was? It wasn't being a deacon. His greatest ministry it was his job, he thought, to take care of the grounds at the church. That's what he felt like God had called him to do. Now, you have to realize that my grandma and grandfather lived right beside the church. They had for many, many years. So my granddad, that was his job. But let me tell you something else that happened during the course of that. My granddad was the type of person where it didn't matter who you were. If you had time to stop, because he was going to greet you. Out working on the church lawn, he was going to greet you. If you came by, he was going to start talking to you. And my granddad didn't know a stranger. Somewhere in the conversation, my granddad was going to let you know who Jesus was in his life and what he had done in his life. Wouldn't it be great if God called you just to be on your knees in prayer for your pastor, on your knees in prayer for the prayer needs. I saw in the bulletin as I was looking through, and I do this, I've gotten the privilege to preach several places in the United States. And I always like to look at the bulletins, and I love to see prayer requests. Wouldn't it be awesome if God called you to take that prayer request form, that list, and set it up on your refrigerator? Or, let me tell you something. I'm very blessed. Sonia and I have been married in December. It'll be 24 years. I'm very, very blessed that her mom and dad are good Christian people. I will guarantee, we're planning a trip to Arkansas, where they live, where we moved from almost 3 years ago, for Thanksgiving. One thing that I can tell you about my mother and father-in-law is that they're praying people. Without a doubt, I know that they pray for me, Sonia, and our girls every day. That's their ministry. My father-in-law used to be a deacon at a fairly big church in Arkansas. But they're praying people because that's the ministry that God's called them, they think, into. When we get to Arkansas in November, I will guarantee that we can walk in, because I've seen it many, many times. We will walk in, and on their kitchen table is a list of people that faithfully, every day, at least 1 or 2 times a day, they pray over that list, and they pray for those people that are on that list. And the list just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Wouldn't it be awesome if God called us to do something as little but as big as prayer? Naaman asked, he said, you know, his servant said, you know, if he'd asked you to do something great, you'd have done it. But he didn't ask you to do something great. All he asked you to do was to go and wash yourself in the Jordan 7 times. And the Bible said that he even blew up at that. He said, let me ask you a question. He says, aren't Abana and Pharpar, which are 2 rivers in Damascus, aren't they a lot closer? And they're a lot cleaner. Couldn't we have just done that? We could have saved this trip. There was, I don't know how many miles. We could have saved the trip over here if he would have just told me to go to one of those rivers. And his servant said, yeah, but that's not what he told you to do. That's not what God told you to do. He said to go and wash in the Jordan 7 times. The muddy Jordan. And this man, I'm sure, as he got to the river and he looked at the river and he thought, it's not going to work. It's not going to happen. But he said to do it. My servant's on to me because my servant seems to think this is going to work. So I can imagine as he got in the first time, folks, as he began to take his armor off. Remember, leprosy. As he began to take his armor off, I can see in my mind's eye that flesh would come off. And the pain that he had to have felt. As he stepped into the Jordan River, I'm sure, how many people have ever had a wound or a cut or something, and you put it in the water and it stings and it burns? And I'm sure that Naaman was thinking, this isn't going to be good. I'm sure that as he stepped into the water for the first time, I'm sure he thought, I don't know how this is going to work, but this is what I'm being told to do. He's probably getting a little bit of pressure by his people by then, just to do what the man of God had told him to do. And so I can imagine as he stepped into the water the first time, and he came back out, and it didn't do any good. And I can imagine as he went in the second time, and it didn't do any good. And you know, I think the fourth thing and the last thing that God requires of us is to be persistent and to be obedient. Because God had told Naaman to go, or through Elisha, to go and dip 7 times. It didn't mean to do it 6 times and then say, just throw your hands up and say it's not going to work. I think that a friend of mine actually said this one time. I think that If Naaman would have known that that Jordan River is where Jesus would have been baptized several years later, don't you think that might have made a difference for him? But I believe, and the Bible says that as Naaman went in the seventh time and he came back out, the Bible says that his skin was whole. Now, to a lot of people that may not mean a lot. To Naaman, it meant everything. The Bible says that it wasn't just that he was healed, but that his skin was soft and just like a newborn baby. Friends, I don't know where you are this morning. I don't know what's happening in your life. But there are some people here that have just got to get to God. There are needs in your life, and you just got to get to God. How many times, and I'll tell you that I can remember when I was saved, and I came down and I prayed with the pastor, and I can remember thinking afterwards, I could have gotten halfway through that and left, and nothing would have changed. That's what we do a lot. We get about almost to where we need to be in our prayer lives or wherever. We get almost to where we need to be, and we get spooked, and we turn around, and we kind of back off before we can get to God. This morning, I don't know where your hearts are. I don't know where your lives are. I don't know what you need from God. But I know that there are special needs that God can meet this morning if you just get to God. You just have to get to God. Stand with me, if you will, and bow your heads. And I'm going to ask